All right, so lately, everywhere you turn in the tech world, everybody's talking about founder mode.
Yeah, it's become quite the buzzword.
It really has. Is it the magic formula for building a tech giant, or just a nice way of saying your CEO is kind of a control freak?
That's what we're here to figure out.
Well said. I love it.
What's fascinating about this whole idea of founder mode is that it digs into something really fundamental about leadership in these fast-growing companies.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's really about how a founder stays deeply, almost instinctively involved in every single part of their business,
Wow.
even as it explodes in size.
Yeah, we've got 3 articles here that approach this from different angles, which I think will be really interesting to dive into.
Okay.
So we've got one from Lead Dev, and they're looking at it from the perspective of software engineers, like how are they impacted by this?
Right.
We've got another one from SVPG, and they're really trying to dissect the mechanics of this leadership style. Like, how does it actually work, or does it work?
Yeah.
And then we've got Molly Graham's perspective.
Yeah.
She's a veteran tech leader who's seen this firsthand in action.
And those different perspectives, I think, are going to be so critical
Definitely.
to really unpacking something that is as nuanced and as debated as founder mode.
Absolutely. And speaking of different perspectives, the Lead Dev article, like, jumps right into the deep end.
Okay.
They talk about Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter,
Yeah.
and they highlight how his very hands-on approach led to all these engineers leaving the company in droves.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, is that founder mode in action, or is that just a cautionary tale about what happens when maybe someone has too much control?
I think you're pointing out like such an important thing to consider, which is that line is very blurry
Yeah.
because true founder mode, when it's working well, relies on the founder having this incredible product sense.
Okay.
They have this deep knowledge of their space, and they're able to communicate that vision in a way that helps everyone else operate as extensions of them.
So they've got to be brilliant and build a killer team. It's not just about them.
Exactly.
It's like they're everywhere at once, but they're also brilliant,
Yeah.
and they also know how to build a team.
It's about amplification, not dictation.
I love it.
Right. But the thing is that when it goes poorly, it goes really poorly.
Oh, yeah.
And you end up with this like really toxic stew of a culture that can suffocate innovation, and it drives away the talent that they need to be successful.
Yeah. And that actually reminds me of this one line from the SVPG article that really stood out to me, where they said, empowered organizations don't require less management, they require better management.
That's good.
But then that begs the question, if you have a founder-led company where everyone's operating as an extension of them, can you really have truly empowered employees?
Right.
I don't know. It feels like a contradiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, how do you balance that hands-on approach with actually giving people the space to do their thing and be creative?
Exactly. And that's where I think this concept of scaling becomes really central to understanding founder mode.
Okay.
Because you're not just talking about one person making all the decisions.
Right.
You're talking about building a whole company that reflect the personality and the instincts of that founder.
So you're like replicating the founder's personality across the entire company.
Yeah, almost like a large-scale imprint, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the double-edged sword comes in.
Okay.
So on the one hand, you have incredible focus speed and clarity of vision that can be really hard to replicate any other way.
Sure. But on the other hand, any weaknesses or blind spots that the founder has are also going to get amplified, right?
Ah, precisely.
Oh, boy.
You think about it, if the culture is essentially a scaled-up version of the founder,
Right.
any quirk, any bias, any flaw in their leadership is just magnified as the company grows.
It's like holding up a magnifying glass to it.
Exactly.
And that's when it can become really unhealthy.
Absolutely.
And it made me think about Molly Graham's article when she was talking about how Google and Facebook had completely different vibes in their early days because it all traced back to the founders.
Oh, yeah.
So you have Google, very engineer-driven, right, deliberate, kind of academic. And then you've got Facebook moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, built for disruption,
Right.
which mirrored Zuckerberg's own style.
And it's such a powerful example because she goes on to explain how this built in their image idea even plays out in the smallest details.
Really?
She gives this great anecdote about delegating hotel purchases.
Okay.
And she says a founder mode leader wouldn't just say, like, book good hotels for the team.
Okay.
They would tell you exactly what good means to them,
Wow.
what factors matter most, and how to think through those decisions based on their understanding of the business.
So it's less about giving a direct order and more about transmitting their entire decision-making process.
Exactly. It's like embedding their instincts into every single process.
I love it.
And this is where she makes a really key point.
Okay.
She says finding people who can work well in that kind of setup, who can operate as extensions of the founder,
Right.
that's incredibly difficult. It's not just about finding people who are smart, it's about finding people who get the founder.
Wow. So they speak the same language, they have the same instincts about stuff.
Exactly. And that's why one of the biggest challenges for founders who try to scale in founder mode is finding those right people, the ones who can not just handle the intensity, but who can really thrive in it.
It sounds like it takes a really special kind of person to pull off this founder mode thing long term.
Yeah, it really does.
Because starting that way might be natural for a lot of founders.
Right.
You're just starting out. It's your baby.
You're scrappy.
Exactly.
You're doing everything yourself.
But trying to maintain that as the company gets bigger and bigger,
That's where it gets really tricky.
yeah.
That requires a whole other level of leadership and self-awareness. And the SVPG article really dives into this.
Okay.
They say it's so important for these founders to be incredible learners.
So they've got to be willing to learn and adapt as they go.
Yeah, they have to be able to evolve their leadership style as the company grows.
Wow.
Because it's not sustainable to keep doing things exactly the same way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you've got to figure out how to empower your teams without losing that core vision.
That reminds me of something I read in the Kellblog article. They basically said, just because a few famous founders made it big with this founder mode style,
Right.
doesn't mean it's the only way to do it,
Absolutely not.
or even the best way.
Right. It's classic survivorship bias.
Exactly.
We focus on the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks who had this intense hands-on style and were wildly successful.
Right. Like, they're the exception, not the rule.
Exactly. But we forget about all the founders who tried that and it didn't work out.
And there are probably a ton that we've never even heard of.
Oh, I'm sure. And we also overlook many who found success by doing things completely differently.
So maybe it's not about founder mode being the magic formula.
Right.
It's more about figuring out the best approach for your specific situation.
Exactly. And I think it's also really important to acknowledge, even with the successes,
Okay.
there can be some serious downsides.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, think about some of the stories we hear about these companies.
Right, like in the UX Collective article, they talked about how some Airbnb employees felt stifled.
Yeah, they had those pretty brutal Glassdoor reviews.
Yeah, they were talking about a culture of micromanagement.
Right, a lack of autonomy.
Like they weren't able to innovate.
And I think that brings us back to what Molly Graham said about delegation.
Okay.
True delegation isn't about micromanaging every single task.
Right.
It's about being crystal clear about the why behind your decisions,
Okay.
the principles that guide you. So you're giving your team the tools and the trust to basically make those decisions as if they were you.
So it's about building that shared understanding, almost like you're creating a common language for how decisions are made.
Exactly. And that allows people to really own their work while still staying true to that founder's vision.
This has been such a fascinating conversation.
It really has.
So much to think about.
Absolutely.
I think the big takeaway here is that founder mode isn't inherently good or bad. It's more nuanced than that.
For sure.
It's about understanding the trade-offs and finding that sweet spot between guiding the ship and letting your crew actually sail it.
Well said. That's a perfect way to put it.
Thanks for diving deep with me on this one.
Anytime. This was fun.